Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So on today's video we will be discussing about a very important feature in Excel, which are the pivot tables. So pivot tables are highly useful to create insights from very large data sets using data aggregation. So what do I mean by data aggregation? Data aggregation simply means to summarize a very large data set and create useful insights as per our requirement from that data. So let me show this through an example. So let us suppose I have this data of a superstore wherein there are multiple customers of the superstore which are from different regions and have purchased products falling under different segments. Let's say I want the sales by region and category of products sold. So I can do that very efficiently using the pivot tables. So with that said, let's get to the main video. Before applying pivot tables to our dataset, we need to ensure that our data follows certain checks or data preparation steps. So the first check that we need to follow is that our data should be in tabular format with unique column headers. The second check that we need to follow is that our data should not have duplicate values as highlighted in red, and also our data should not have any aggregated rows which calculate the total of particular numeric columns. So this is because pivot tables treat every record as a single entity, and if you have duplicate entries in your dataset, then you might be adding up duplicate entries twice or thrice, and your numbers will be inflated, or the output datasheet will not show the correct numbers. The third check is that your data should not have any blank columns or blank rows or blank cells inside of it. The fourth check that we need to follow is that our data should not have any column filters applied to it, or there should not be any grouped columns or grouped rows in our data set. Once we are done with all the data preparation steps, we need to insert pivot tables to our data. So for that, we will just select our entire data and we will convert our data into a data table. So for that, you can go to home and go to format as table and just select any of the banded rows and press OK. So in this way, this data will convert into a data table. So this is useful because once you convert it into a data table, any further addition into this data will be automatically detected by the pivot tables, and you need not to manually add or delete data into the data source of the pivot table. You can do this alternately by just selecting the entire data and pressing Ctrl T to convert this data into a data table. So now we can just insert pivot onto our data set. So for that, I will just place my cursor on the data and then go to insert tab. And over here, I have two options. So I can choose the recommended pivot tables option, which will show me the suggestions as to how you can generate useful insights automatically by the suggestions that the Excel is providing you. Otherwise, if you want to create pivot tables manually, you can just select the pivot table button. Since I want a new pivot in the new worksheet, so I'm selecting the new worksheet radio button and I will press OK. So now I will have this sheet opened wherein I can manually create my pivot tables as per my requirement. For creating the pivot tables manually, we first need to have the pivot table field option, which is populated over here. If you're not able to see this tab into your sheet, you can just simply place your cursor on the pivot table, go to pivot table analyze, and press this field list button so that this field list area is available to you. Once we have the table fields available, we can just create our own pivot tables using the four key components of this pivot table field area. So those four key components are filters, columns, rows, and values. So filters are basically visible over here. Similarly, we have columns which would be visible on moving from left to right in our pivot table. So these furniture, office supplies, technology are basically columns since I have dragged category into the column section. Similarly, we have rows. Since I have dragged region into the rows column, we have all the regions shown as rows in our pivot table. And similarly, we have the values component, which is very useful to aggregate the numeric data. So under this value component, we have the numeric data always. So which is sales in our scenario. So that is why I have placed sales under values, which is why it is showing the sum of sales as of now in column D to G in our pivot tables. With that said, let's move on to create our own pivot table. So let's say I want to find the sales by every region. So for that, what I will do is I will just simply select the region column and drag it into the rows shelf. And now I want sales by region. So I will be dropping sales in the value region. So now I have sales by every region. So since this is showing up as decimal values, I will format this a bit. So I will just simply remove the decimal points, and I will change the number formats to currency specifically. So let's say I want to convert this into something in dollar. So once I'm done with that, I'm able to see that the central region has close to 5 million worth of sales, and similarly we have 6.78 million worth of sales for east region. And then if I want to have the sales not just by region, by category as well, so I can drag and drop the category into the column shelf. So now my sales will be divided into furniture, office supplies, and technology. So now I can see that this is the sales that I have under every category as well. So with the data that we had, the long tabular data, now I'm able to populate some useful insights, or I can report some useful insights to my business stakeholders very efficiently using the pivot tables. So now let's suppose I want to apply a filter of, let's say, city onto my data. So I will just drag and drop the city column into the filter shelf, and now I can select basically the cities for which I want data on. So let's say I want data for just these three cities, and I'll press OK. So now my data will get updated, and now I have the data for the selected cities. The second way of applying filter to your pivot table is by creating a slicer. So what you can do is just place your cursor on the pivot table, go to the pivot table analyze ribbon, and press the insert slicer button. So now it will prompt you to select the column onto which you want to apply filter. So let's say I want to apply a filter on the city column. Once I do that, I have a list of all the cities. So slicers are basically clickable buttons that are used to apply filters on the pivot tables. So if I want to select multiple cities over here, so what I can do is I can just simply click this button, and now I can select multiple cities of my choice, and my data will get updated accordingly. So let us suppose I don't want to calculate the sum of sales. Instead, I want to calculate the average of sales across the region and the category of product sold. So for that, what I can do is I can go to the value shelf, and I will select this drop down arrow, and I will go to value field settings. And over here, I have multiple options to select as per my requirement, whichever function I want to use to aggregate my data. So over here, I want the average of sales. So I'm selecting average, and then I will press OK. So now it shows me the average sales across the region and the category in my pivot table. Let us suppose I have new data over here, which is my data source, and I want to update my pivot data or refresh my pivot data accordingly. So what I can do is once I have updated the data source with the new data, I can just simply place my cursor on the pivot table, go to pivot table analyze, and press the refresh button, and your values will get refreshed automatically. We can also create charts from our pivot tables by just simply placing our cursor on the pivot table and going to pivot chart option. It will suggest us the charts that it can create out of the data that we have in the pivot table. So if I click OK onto this chart, this is a very beautiful chart which we can see using our pivot table. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon in the next video.